He thought she'd stay quiet. He thought wrong. The chamber was tense, not the kind of tension that builds slowly, but the kind that flickers and crackles just beneath the surface, waiting for the match. Senator Ron Johnson leaned back in his chair, arms folded, lips curled into that now infamous smirk. It wasn't casual. It was calculated. The kind of grin that says, "You don't belong here," without ever needing to say it. Across the dais sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Calm, still, but not silent. Johnson glanced around, then let out the line flippant, dismissive, and cruel in its precision. "Well, I suppose law school nowadays doesn't quite prepare everyone for serious legislative work." The room stilled. Staffers froze mid-note. Aides stopped typing. Eyes turned toward Crockett. She didn't flinch, didn't raise an eyebrow. She simply reached forward and clicked her mic on. "Senator Johnson," she began, her voice even, smooth as glass, "you may want to double-check your assumption file, because I didn't come here to audition for your approval." The air shifted. "You don't get to define what seriousness looks like just because you're uncomfortable with how it now looks." Johnson blinked. Just once. "But that was enough," she continued. "When you've spent your life defending people who didn't have a senator to lean on when you fought uphill every step, and still ended up at this table, you tend to take these spaces seriously. Maybe more seriously than those who were handed a seat." It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Johnson turned slightly toward his staffer, muttered something off mic, and began shuffling his papers. Then came the moment caught on 3 C-SPAN angles, replayed a million times. He stood. He didn't look at her. He walked out. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was electric. Because everyone in that room, and eventually everyone watching across the country, knew exactly what had just happened. He underestimated her, and she made history out of it. But when Crockett leaned in and took a breath, everyone knew the game had changed. It would be easy to call it a viral moment, a mic drop, a takedown, a clapback for the algorithm. But that would miss the point entirely. Because what happened in that hearing wasn't just about one insult or one response. It was about the invisible script women like Jasmine Crockett are handed the moment they enter power. Be smart, but not too sharp. Be strong, but never threatening. Be unapologetic, but always polite. Ron Johnson's smirk wasn't just condescension. It was a message, spoken between the lines. Know your place. And the fact that he said it in public on the record, in a hearing room filled with press and cameras, is exactly why it matters. Because he believed he could. Because men like him have, for generations, been rewarded for it. This wasn't just a disagreement on policy. This was a test of presence, of legitimacy, of who gets to belong without explanation, and who is expected to earn their seat again and again, every single day. And it happens every day. In boardrooms, courtrooms, classrooms. When a black woman speaks, and the room hears attitude. When a daughter of immigrants questions authority, and the system sees disrespect. When someone refuses to code switch, to soften, to shrink, and is punished for daring to speak in full volume. Crockett didn't just defend herself. She cracked the facade. She exposed the delicate machinery of decorum that so often disguises power plays as procedure. And when she challenged Johnson's smug dismissal, it wasn't just her voice we heard. It was the echo of every voice that's ever been talked over, brushed aside, told to calm down or be professional, when all they were doing was telling the truth out loud. This moment matters because it revealed something raw and real, that in the halls of government, silence is still the currency of acceptance, and breaking it comes at a cost. But Crockett paid it, on the spot, with full clarity and zero hesitation. She didn't lose her temper. She didn't raise her voice. She raised the standard, and for everyone watching who's been underestimated, passed over, or told they were too much, it was more than satisfying. It was vindication. And yet we're still just getting started. Because what Crockett says next, it doesn't just defend her, it exposes the entire charade of the hearing itself. Before the smirk, before the walkout, before the cameras lit up, there was always Ron Johnson. Senior senator from Wisconsin, millionaire businessman turned lawmaker, a man whose power has rarely, if ever, been questioned, at least not to his face. Johnson didn't rise through struggle. He didn't fight his way into Congress with grassroots organizing or courtrooms full of people who couldn't afford justice. He came from a world where boardroom confidence was mistaken for wisdom and inherited access past his merit. Born into a comfortable Midwestern family, Johnson co-founded a plastics company with the financial backing of his wife's wealthy family. His foray into politics? Self-funded, fast-tracked, uncomplicated. He didn't have to prove he belonged. He just had to show up, and once he did, he made it clear time and again who he was there to protect. This is the same Ron Johnson who questioned why Congress even needed to investigate January 6th, who once said, on live radio, that he would have been more afraid if the Capitol rioters had been from Black Lives Matter. The same Ron Johnson who called climate change bullshit, who dismissed the urgency of COVID-19 as media hysteria, and who repeatedly questioned whether vaccines were necessary, even as his constituents died by the thousands. He doesn't shout. He doesn't storm. He doesn't need to. Because for Ron Johnson, arrogance has always been calm. It drips from the tone of a rhetorical question. It hides behind the smile of a man who knows the rules were written for him and rewritten for everyone else. And in that hearing room, when he leaned forward and cast doubt on Repress Jasmine Crockett's credentials, it wasn't a slip. It was instinct. To him, this wasn't a debate. It was a disruption of order, the kind of order where he's always been the one doing the talking. Because Crockett wasn't just a colleague. She was a mirror, and she reflected something Johnson has spent decades avoiding: accountability. She is educated not by elite inheritance, but by earned grit. She is powerful not because someone opened a door, but because she kicked it down. And most threatening of all, she isn't afraid of men like him. Johnson, like many before him, is most comfortable when he's unchallenged. He prefers hearings where questions are rhetorical and answers are optional, where smugness masquerades as intellect, and the only people who push back are too deferential to press the point. But Jasmine Crockett didn't blink, and that terrifies him, because her presence breaks the pattern. Her voice pierces through the performance. Her resume, a lawyer, a civil rights advocate, a former public defender, is not just impressive. It's dangerous to the status quo he's always counted on. So when he smirked that day, it wasn't just at her. It was at the audacity of her very presence. And when she answered not with rage, but with restraint, not with venom, but with vision, Johnson couldn't stay. He had to leave. Because staying meant confronting what the moment truly represented: the slow but certain shift in American power, from inherited comfort to earned conviction, from entitled dominance to accountable dialogue. Ron Johnson didn't just walk out of a hearing, he walked out of a world he no longer controls. And Jasmine Crockett? She didn't just remain seated. She stood for something without ever leaving her chair. Long before the lights of Congress reflected off her nameplate, before the headlines, the viral clips, and the unexpected walkout that made her a household name, Jasmine Crockett was fighting for people no one else would fight for. Not in marble halls, but in cramped courtrooms. Not with staffers and strategy memos, but with grit, case files, and the quiet resolve of someone who knows she's not supposed to win, but plans to anyway. She was a public defender in Texas. Young, black, female. In a justice system designed to grind the vulnerable down, she chose to stand in the path of the machine. Day after day, she took on cases others waved away, clients others dismissed, lives society had already labeled disposable. She didn't do it for applause. She did it because someone had to. And in those courtrooms, in those heated exchanges, something forged itself in her. A clarity, a discipline, a fearlessness not born of arrogance but of purpose. It wasn't about proving she belonged. It was about making space for people who never got the chance to ask. Her reputation spread, not as a politician, as a problem to prosecutors, to judges, to anyone who confused power with righteousness. She spoke in full sentences when others hedged. She objected when others compromised. And even then, they tried to paint her as emotional, aggressive, too much. But the more they said it, the more she refused to shrink, because Jasmine Crockett knew what they feared wasn't her anger, it was her clarity. From there, she didn't climb. She battled. From activist to attorney to state legislator, every rung of the ladder came with more resistance, more coded warnings, more rooms that paused when she entered. But she kept going. In 2020, as democracy bent beneath the weight of disinformation and voter suppression, Crockett didn't watch from the sidelines. She organized. She marched. She litigated. And when her colleagues in Texas fled the state to block a regressive voting bill, she was on the front lines, unapologetic, unbought, and unbothered. That same year, she ran for Congress. They said she was too loud, too controversial, too raw. But what they couldn't say not truthfully was that she wasn't qualified. She won. And from the moment she stepped into Congress, she refused to leave her roots behind. She didn't trade in her voice for vague centrism. She brought her fire with her not to burn bridges, but to light paths for those still in the dark. She stood for accountability, even when it was inconvenient. She asked the questions others avoided. She spoke with the rhythm of someone raised on truth, not political etiquette. She wore her hair how she wanted. She spoke how she wanted. She was who she wanted. And that, more than anything, made her dangerous. Because for people like Ron Johnson, men who built entire careers on unquestioned presence, Crockett's existence is a disruption. Not because she's angry, but because she refuses to be erased. They call her aggressive. But the truth is, she's prepared. They call her performative. But the truth is, she's principled. They call her divisive. But the truth is, she's direct. Every inch of her journey has been earned. No family dynasties, no backdoor deals, just sweat, strategy, and the kind of unrelenting belief in justice that makes comfort tremble. And when she sat across from Johnson silent, at first she wasn't rattled, because she'd been here before, in a different form, a different name, a different face, another man with a smirk, another room trying to decide if she was allowed to speak, and it was that same fire, that same unshakable calm that she brought. With her, when Johnson leaned across the mic, the hearing was supposed to be routine, the kind where politicians grandstand for the cameras, lob questions with no interest in the answers, and quietly check their phones while someone else speaks. But not this time. Ron Johnson was restless. He'd already shuffled his notes 3 times, interrupted 2 witnesses, and tossed around the word decorum like a verbal shield. Then he glanced across the room and paused. There she was, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, seated upright, hands folded neatly, expression unreadable. Listening. That kind of composure? It irritated him, so he leaned in. "You know, I miss the days when this chamber was about facts and serious voices," he said, voice dripping with forced nostalgia. "Not folks chasing sound bites for their next Twitter moment." The words landed with the thud of plausible deniability. No names were mentioned, but the subtext rang out like a bell. A few heads turned. One staffer raised an eyebrow. Crockett didn't move. Johnson continued, emboldened. "Back then, we knew what qualifications meant. We respected experience, and we didn't confuse courtroom theatrics with legislative substance. Still no names, but now it was unmistakable." He was baiting her. A smirk curled at the corner of his mouth. That same smirk, the one he wore when dismissing climate science, denying insurrection threats, waving off the lived experiences of anyone who didn't look like him. He waited for her to snap, to speak out of turn, to give him the out he was hoping for. Instead, Crockett glanced at the chair, then at the mic. Her hand hovered, then settled. Not yet. Silence, measured, controlled. Johnson shifted in his seat. Irritated by her restraint, he tried again. "Frankly, I find it concerning when certain members lean on identity as if it's a qualification. I thought this chamber was about merit." There it was. The mockery wasn't subtle anymore. It was polished in respectability language, but clear in its contempt. Crockett sat still, but the temperature shifted. One aide whispered to another. A reporter in the back straightened in their chair. Even the chairman looked up from his binder. Johnson mistook the silence for submission. He chuckled. "I'm sorry if that offends anyone. I'm just old-fashioned. That way?" And then finally Crockett moved. She reached forward. Calm, deliberate. Pressed the button on her mic. It clicked on with a soft pop that sounded louder than any gavel. She turned her eyes toward him. Steady. Not angry. Focused. And then she turned her mic back on and let him have it. The mic clicked on. The room held its breath. Jasmine Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Every word was a scalpel, clean, deliberate, cutting straight to the truth. "Senator Johnson," she began, her eyes locked onto his. "I sat here quietly, as you questioned the seriousness of people like me." A pause. Sharp, intentional. "I've been told my entire life that being calm makes me credible, that not showing emotion makes me palatable, that if I don't raise my voice maybe, just maybe someone like you will listen." Murmurs stirred along the back row. Phones began recording. Crockett continued. "But let me explain something. I didn't get here to make you comfortable." Johnson shifted. That smile, the practiced, patronizing one, started to twitch. "You speak about qualifications, about merit, about who's worthy of speaking in this chamber," she said, each phrase clipped with precision. "Well, Senator, I earned every seat I've ever sat in. No trust fund, no family name. Just degrees, courtrooms, and communities that believed in me." The temperature in the room rose. You could feel it, the crackling energy of a moment turning seismic. "And let me remind you," she said, leaning ever so slightly forward, "I'm not here because of privilege. I'm here in spite of it." Boom. It wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. A single staffer in the back drew in a breath audibly. Crockett let the silence hang. "I didn't inherit a seat. I built one, and every day I sit in it, I carry with me the names of people whose lives have never once intersected with yours, except when you vote against their interests." Johnson opened his mouth, closed it again. She turned slightly toward the dais, addressing the room. "You mentioned decorum. Let's talk about that. Decorum is not a weapon to be used against people who make you uncomfortable. Decorum is not a substitute for decency. And let me be crystal clear, there is nothing decent about undermining a colleague's background while pretending you're the victim." The murmurs became rumbles. One senator whispered something to a staffer. Another pulled their blazer forward, fidgeting in their seat. Crockett wasn't finished. "You want to talk about seriousness?" she asked. "Let's talk about the seriousness of defending insurrectionists, the seriousness of questioning the legitimacy of elections, the seriousness of using your platform to undermine truth while hiding behind tradition." Johnson leaned toward his aide, whispered frantically, and still she pressed on. "I've faced judges who tried to silence me, prosecutors who tried to discredit me, rooms filled with people who looked just like you and expected me to break." She looked directly at him now. "I don't break, Senator." That was the moment. The moment the room shifted entirely, from awkward discomfort to full-blown attention. Eyes on her. No blinking. No side chatter. Just the gravity of a woman who had waited long enough. Johnson tried to interrupt. A raised hand. A half-formed sentence. "I think we've heard enough." "No," Crockett said firmly. "Now you've heard enough." There was no shouting. Just finality. Johnson sat back. For once, no smirk. Just stillness. Then, without a word, he reached for his notes, glanced around, and nodded once toward his aide. And stood. He didn't look at her, didn't offer a rebuttal. He walked out. The door closed behind him with a dull echo, not loud, but definitive. A beat passed, then another, and then it started. First, a chuckle, then a ripple of soft, stunned laughter. Then, from the back of the room, someone muttered under their breath, "She got him." By the time Crockett clicked her mic off, the moment had already left the chamber and entered the bloodstream of the internet. Within minutes, the clip was everywhere. TikTok. Split screens of the moment, layered with reactions. One creator's jaw drops. Another rewinds the "I'm not here because of privilege" line 5 times in a row, adding captions, "Say that again for the people in the back." Twitter. This is the kind of fire we need in Congress. Crockett didn't just clap back, she called the whole system out. Ron Johnson smirked his way into a political obituary. She didn't flinch. She educated the man. Live. Crockett clapped back. Trends within 15 minutes. YouTube reaction videos. Political creators break it down frame by frame. Body language analysts highlight Johnson's shifting posture. Former prosecutors praise her pacing. One host declares, "This wasn't a takedown, this was a masterclass." But the real moment isn't the walkout or the trending tag. It's the message. Jasmine Crockett didn't just defend herself. She dismantled the theater, exposed the entire charade of polite power and institutional arrogance, with poise, with facts, with purpose. And by the time Ron Johnson reached the hallway, the country wasn't asking why he left. They were asking how she stayed that calm, while burning the whole stage down. It started with a spark, the flick of a mic switch, the steady rise of Jasmine Crockett's voice, and within hours, it was a wildfire. By the end of the day, the clip had been viewed over 4 million times across platforms. By the end of the week, it had redefined the political conversation. On TikTok, the duets rolled in by the thousands. One creator, tears welling in her eyes, mouthed along to Crockett's takedown, "I'm not here because of privilege. I'm here in spite of it." The caption read, "She said what my mother couldn't say at her job for 20 years. Another stitched it with nothing but a slow zoom into their face, whispering, "This is how you hold power accountable. This is how you carry a people with you." The hashtag #CrocketClappback climbed to number 3 on Twitter, just behind a pop star breakup and a playoff upset. And fiery walked out Ron wasn't far behind, trending across political, comedy, and Gen Z feeds alike. Twitter's political sphere lit up. Jasmine Crockett gave a masterclass in dignity under fire. Ron Johnson thought he was in control. Crockett turned the tables with one sentence. "This isn't just viral. It's vindication for every woman ever talked down to in a meeting." Memes exploded, a split screen of Crockett mid-sentence and Johnson mid-walkout. Caption: "When you realize you're not the smartest one in the room anymore." Another: Crockett with digital sunglasses descending over her eyes, thug life style, while lo-fi music played beneath her final line. Even late-night hosts got in on it. Trevor Noah: "Ron Johnson walked out of that hearing so fast, I thought someone told him the truth was catching up." John Oliver ran a full segment. In a building filled with empty speeches and fake outrage, one congresswoman actually said something real, and a senator who couldn't handle it sprinted for the hills. Mainstream media scrambled to catch up. Cable news panels debated Crockett's performance like it was a playoff highlight reel. MSNBC ran the headline, "Crockett versus Johnson, a cultural collision in Congress." CNN called it a moment of generational reckoning. But the most powerful validation didn't come from pundits. It came from the people. Instagram comment sections overflowed. "I've never felt more seen by a politician. She spoke like my sister, my mom, my community. Finally, someone in that room spoke for us. This wasn't a moment. This was a movement. She said what so many of us wish we could say in that room." Donations to Crockett's re-election campaign surged. Volunteers signed up by the hundreds. Emails poured in from teachers, nurses, truck drivers, students, people from every background who saw themselves in her. Because it wasn't just what she said. It was how she said it. With control, not contempt, with purpose, not posturing. She didn't need to shout to make her voice thunder. She didn't need to insult to make her point devastating, and that struck a chord. For every woman told to watch her tone. For every young professional whose ideas were repackaged by someone louder in the room. For every Black woman whose credentials were questioned before her voice was ever heard. They watched Crockett unshaken, razor-sharp, and resolute, and felt it in their bones. She's one of us. Even high school students started sharing clips in group chats and on Reddit threads. This is why I want to study law. My civics teacher showed this in class. Is this what real leadership sounds like? Political podcasts dissected the moment like it was a championship debate. Analysts called it a rare instance of authenticity in a space built on performance. But beyond the content, beyond the headlines and hashtags, it was the feeling that lingered. Viewers didn't just watch the moment. They lived it. They felt the smirk. They heard the condescension. They sat in that silence waiting for her to respond. And when she did, calm, devastating, flawless, it wasn't just a comeback, it was a reclaiming of space, of voice, of worth. Jasmine Crockett didn't just speak truth to power. She reminded millions of people that truth, when spoken clearly and without apology, is power. And for a moment, in a room built to keep so many out, they all felt like they were finally let in. This was never just about Ron Johnson and Jasmine Crockett. It was about something deeper, older, etched into the grain of the hearing room's wood and the rules that govern its silence. It was about who gets to speak and who's expected to sit still. And Johnson walked into that chamber carrying status, years in office, party loyalty, an unspoken sense that his voice carried more weight because it had echoed in those halls longer. Jasmine Crockett walked in, carrying something else. Service. She carried the voices of the accused she once stood beside in court, the families who invited her into their neighborhoods, not because of a camera, but because she showed up. The community organizers who taught her that change doesn't trickle from power, it rises from the ground. And when Johnson tried to use his status to silence her, Crockett responded not with volume, but with values, not with fury, but with focus. Because she understood something that too many in power forget. Authority doesn't come from how long you've held the mic. It comes from how many voices you carry with you when you speak into it. That's why her words resonated beyond the marble halls, because they weren't just hers. They belonged to every person who's been dismissed as too passionate, too direct, too much. They belonged to every woman who kept her voice steady while her competence was questioned. Every young leader who was told to wait their turn while the world burned. Every person whose presence made someone uncomfortable, not because they were unqualified, but because they were undeniable. Crockett's takedown didn't just pierce a senator's ego. It pierced the illusion that power is earned by longevity alone. She reminded the country that courage doesn't look like pounding a gavel. Sometimes it looks like a calm, clear sentence delivered at the exact right moment. And while Johnson walked out of that room holding his pride, Crockett stayed holding something far heavier: responsibility. Because what she did in those few minutes wasn't just defend herself, she set a new precedent, one where seriousness is measured not by pedigree, but by purpose. One where leadership doesn't mean avoiding the fire, it means walking straight into it, steady and unshaken. One where dignity isn't the absence of emotion, it's the presence of discipline. This is what the future of political leadership looks like. It's sharp, it's grounded, and it's not here to wait for permission. Crockett's response will be studied not as a perfect rebuttal, but as a turning point, a reminder that truth spoken plainly can outlast any title, any smirk, any exit, because in that room, something shifted. Not just the dynamics of a hearing, but the expectations of an entire generation watching from outside the walls. And it ended with this. In a room built for silence, she chose to speak, and because she did, millions listened. She walked into that hearing underestimated, dismissed before she even spoke, labeled before she even moved. A woman of color, a freshman congresswoman, a public defender turned lawmaker in the eyes of the powerful. She was supposed to be peripheral. But Jasmine Crockett didn't just show up. She stood up, with calm, with clarity, with conviction. She didn't match condescension with rage. She didn't raise her voice to meet his. She let her words deliberate, measured, devastating do what titles never could. Tell the truth. From dismissed to defiant. From defiant to dominant. And she did it without flinching. This moment reminded us that power isn't loud. Real power stands firm when the room expects you to shrink. Real power doesn't wait for permission to speak. It recognizes that dignity, earned through service and struggle, carries more weight than any nameplate on a desk. So ask yourself, when your moment comes, will you smirk and hide? Or will you be the mic drop? Because this wasn't just her win. It was a signal to all of us that we don't have to outshout, we just have to outstand. Subscribe if you believe truth speaks louder than titles. Share this if you've ever been underestimated. And drop a I for Crockett in the comments, because she didn't just win the moment, she redefined it.